I don't know about any of you, but there are some difficult passages in the Bible. This is one difficult passage, or has been for me, Matthew 15. And this is the story of the Syrophoenician woman. It hasn't in the past represented the Jesus that I know, because my Jesus cares about people. He ministered to the vulnerable. He didn't ignore them. My Jesus also wouldn't use racial slurs toward people. And yet in this story, it seems that he does. And in fact, some scholars actually look upon this story as being a troubling embarrassment, because a sincere woman approaches Jesus and asks for help, and Jesus ignores her. And then when he finally spoke to her, he appeared to be both racist and insensitive to her suffering. So how are we to understand this story? What happens when we look at it in context? Because something that I learned when studying theology, that context is so extremely important in these stories. If we don't understand the context or the backstory, then we can miss some pertinent points of the story. And there are different kinds of context as well. And today I'm going to look mostly at the historical context, but we'll also take a brief look at the literary context. So the historical context, we have to remember that this story, in this woman's world, she was bringing shame to herself to talk to a man that she'd never met. And likewise, if Jesus were to talk to this woman, he would also bring shame on himself to answer her. Secondly, the honor-shame aspect as that we talk about that brought shame, in this historical context, the shame was not brought just to themselves, but to their whole families. In this historical context, kinship was also valued. You didn't ask or say what you wanted to be when you grow up. I remember as a child that I always used to say I wanted to be a nurse when I grew up. That was not the question that you asked in this kinship context. Rather, the question was asked, what does the family need me to be? In this historical context, patriarchal rules, men always made the decisions. And it was usually the oldest male in the family that made those decisions for everyone else within this family. This was also a society of limited goods. By limited goods, I'm talking about when those goods are finished, there's no more. So if I were to eat more than my share, that means that someone else is going to miss out. There's not always going to be enough to go around. Tyre was a place where wealthy people lived, and the use of Greek in this context was also indicative that this woman may have been from the elite of the Syrophoenician area. This woman was used to eating at tables, and we know that in this historical context, that was only the wealthy people that ate at tables. Also, this woman was familiar with beds. Most people in this time didn't use beds, but slept on the ground. Only the wealthy people knew what it was like to sleep in a bed. And an important component in both the parables of Jesus and the dramatic stories about him is the ever-present community. Descartes in the 17th, he was a 17th century philosopher, and he concluded cogito ergo sum, which translated means I think, therefore I am. But the African theologians answered that with I am because we are. Their community gives identity and profoundly influences both their lifestyle and their attitudes. And in the stories of Jesus, the surrounding community, whether it be on stage or off stage, is a critical component in everything that takes place. The community's presence must be factored into any interpretation. So in this story, we have a community that is composed of the disciples who are on stage with Jesus. They're also in dialogue with him. Jesus is not simply dealing with this unnamed woman. He is also interacting on a very deep level with his disciples. And this double interaction needs to be monitored throughout this story. The woman's request, behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and cried, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely possessed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. This scene is taking place in a Gentile province, and Jesus was clearly able to speak with the people without a translator. The woman begins with the traditional cry of a beggar, have mercy on me. She's reaching out to Jesus across two barriers. First, she is a woman. Jesus is a man. And even today, in some conservative areas of the Middle East, men and women do not talk to strangers across that gender barrier. In public, rabbis did not talk to the female members of their own families, much less a stranger that they'd never met. And secondly, the woman in this story is a Gentile. Her initial request opens with the title Kyrie, which means Lord or Sir, to which she adds a relatively rare Jewish messianic title, Son of David. This implies that she has had some contact with Judaism. Without that second title, it would be possible to translate Kyrie as Sir. But when she adds Son of David, she means more than Sir. For a Gentile woman to use this combination is quite unexpected. The woman also does not ask for mercy for her daughter, who is the sick one, but rather she says, "Have mercy on me." The daughter was not able to feel what this woman was feeling. This woman was in pain. She was at the end of her rope. She also needs healing. Jesus empathizes with her deep needs and responds to them on two levels. Jesus responds to this woman's request, first of all, with silence. Is this indifference and rejection? Remember that Jesus is dealing with the woman, but at the same time, he's educating his disciples. For the woman, Jesus chooses to give her a critical test. There is an obvious parallel to this text in the story of Elijah, the Old Testament prophet, and his visit to the region of Sidon. Like Elijah, Jesus is dealing with a Gentile widow who has a needy child. Like Elijah, he begins with an exam. But in Jesus' case, the exam process is being carefully observed by his disciples. Jesus, as the rabbinic scholar, is reenacting his authoritative source, Elijah's story, for the benefit of the woman and for the education of his graduate students, the disciples. And in this process, he not only heals the woman's daughter, but he gives the woman the privilege of earning the unfading honor of passing a very tough exam that immortalizes her. When Jesus did not respond to the woman's plea, he was no doubt seen by the disciples as acting in an entirely appropriate manner. He appears to endorse views towards with which the disciples were no doubt very comfortable. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." The disciples noted Jesus' silence, and taking their clue, they petition him with the cry, "Send her away." They assume that Jesus has no time for the shouting beggar, but they are mistaken. Their plea merely begins the three-scene dialogue. The text can be understood as follows. Jesus is irritated by the disciples' attitudes regarding women and Gentiles. The woman's love for her daughter and her confidence in him impress Jesus. He decides to use the occasion to help her, as well as to challenge the deeply rooted prejudices in the hearts of his disciples. In the process, he gives the woman a chance to expose the depth of her courage and faith. Jesus' approach to the education of his disciples is both subtle and powerful, because there's no lecture. On the contrary, he appears to agree with them. His refusal to speak to a Gentile woman, he states his ministry is for the lost sheep of Israel. She'll have no choice but to leave. Jesus was voicing and thereby exposing a deeply held prejudice buried in the minds of the disciples. Jesus was speaking to both audiences. To the disciples, he was saying, "Of course I want to get rid of her. We have no time for such female Gentile trash." But to the woman, Jesus was initially saying, "You are a Canaanite and a woman. I am a son of David. You are not part of my mandate. Why should I serve Gentiles like you?" Would she leave? The second stage of her exam is very quick to follow. Was her concern for her child so deep and her confidence in compassion and the healing power of Jesus so profound that she would proceed with her request despite this apparent slamming of the door in her face? Her reaction was, but she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." This is probably one of the most difficult sections of this story to me. But the woman's response was both moving as well as magnificent. She omits the messianic title and the beggar's traditional petition. In stark simplicity, she kneels at Jesus' feet and emits the cry of an anguished human soul, "Lord, help me." She may not be aware of the story of Elijah and the woman of the Zarapheth, but the disciples know it well. They are also familiar with the classical prophetic concern for the widow and the orphan. Only the hardest of hearts would be unmoved by the woman's dramatic action and her desperate words. Will Jesus venture beyond his mandate to serve Israel and help this Gentile woman? Not quite yet. Jesus chooses to take the theological attitudes of the disciples and press them to their ultimate conclusion. In effect, Jesus tells the disciples, "You'd be happy if I will verbalize where your theology leads us. This will give you a chance to observe the response of this unclean Gentile woman." Jesus' verbalization is authentic to their attitudes and feelings, but it sounds shocking when put into words and thrown into the face of a desperate kneeling woman pleading for the sanity of her daughter. It is acutely embarrassing to hear and see one's deepest prejudices verbalized and demonstrated. It forces you to face those biases often for the first time. And the language that Jesus uses is very strong. Dogs in the Middle East, in Middle Eastern traditional culture, both Jewish and non-Jewish, are almost as despised as pigs. Pigs are worse, but only slightly so. Dogs are never pets. They are kept as half-wild guard dogs. And if you can see the slides in my PowerPoint presentation, those dogs are ones that we saw at every single lot of ruins that we visited. There was always a dog present. They were half-starved, wild dogs, guard dogs that are left to wander unattended as dangerous street scavengers who subsist on the garbage. To insult the woman with such language is something else, and yet the harsh language also carries a touch of gentleness, because Jesus speaks of the little dogs, not the guard dogs that no one dares approach. But still, this language is insulting. The reference to dogs is primarily for the disciples' education. He is saying, I know you think Gentiles are dogs and you want me to treat them as such, but pay attention, because this is where your biases lead. Are you comfortable with this scene? How will this woman respond? Her exam has reached a demanding section. Will she reply with a corresponding insult against the haughty Jews who despise and verbally attack Gentiles? Or is her love for her daughter, her faith that Jesus has the power of God to heal, her confidence that he has compassion for Gentiles, and her commitment to him as her master and Lord, so strong that she will absorb the insult and press on, yet again with her request? She said, yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs eat the little crumbs that fall from their master's table. And then Jesus answered her, woman, great is your faith. This woman passed her exam with flying colours. She accepted the insult and deftly turned it back with a touch of humour into a renewed request. I know that in your eyes, we may appear as little dogs, and as little dogs, we deserve nothing. But the little dogs are thrown the crumbs, the little pieces of bread at the end of the meal. You are still my Lord and Master, and I know that you can heal my daughter, and you have compassion for everyone. Do you not have just a little crumb for me? We have a little dog. His name is Finn, and when we have him around the dinner table, he sits there looking at us with pleading eyes. And I like to think that maybe this woman looked at Jesus with those pleading eyes. The disciples were also watching and listening. They have never seen such confidence in the person of Jesus. In spite of his hard words, nor such compassionate love for a sick child. Her response is a deadly blow to their carefully nurtured prejudices against women and Gentiles. A new paradigm of who God is and to whom he extends his love through Jesus is born as a result of this sin. In the process, the woman's faith is rendered unforgettable and is proclaimed wherever the gospel is preached. Jesus pronounces the woman to be great in faith. Her faith is expressed in her unfailing confidence in the person Jesus as the agent of God's salvation for all, both Jew and Gentile. She confesses him as Lord and Master. A final, almost indefinable element in that faith is her willingness to pay any price, even public humiliation, in order to receive that grace that is mediated by Jesus, who now concludes by saying, "Be it done for you as you desire." And the Bible tells us that her daughter was healed instantly. The silence that Jesus began is now broken with a word of healing power. The verb "was healed" is passive because God restores the daughter through the agency of Jesus. The powerful word spoken by Jesus is a divine act. The woman is elevated as a gold medal Olympian in a great test of faith. Her qualities can be noted in those three virtues. First, her humility as she lowers herself to the place of a dog. Second, her deep faith as that small amount of his food is enough. And third is her wisdom in that she was willing to act the part of a dog until she achieved her goal. And throughout this event, an enormous amount of spiritual formation is taking place in the hearts of the disciples, and indeed potentially in the hearts of any of the readers of the Gospel of Mark and Matthew. What can we learn from this account? Firstly, we learn that Jesus breaks down the barriers. Not only did he break down the gender barrier by talking to the woman, he also broke a racial barrier by healing this Gentile. Secondly, we learn that evil cannot be redeemed until it is exposed. Jesus exposes deep prejudices in the heart of his disciples. They remembered the story. Was it a critical event in their journey to a vision for the world? Third, Jesus cares about the woman, her daughter, and his disciples. The story demonstrates his caring for all of the people within this framework. And fourthly, we learn that Jesus praised the Gentile woman for her faith. She believed that he had the healing power of God and that he cared for all people, particularly anyone who is suffering. And her faith is sustained. God honors the faith of his loved ones. And finally, let's have a brief look at the literary context. When we look at Mark's account of this story, Mark 7 is the story of the Syrophoenician woman, but it's sandwiched between two accounts of Jesus feeding the multitudes. In Mark 6, Jesus fed the 5,000 on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. There were 12 baskets of food left over. On this side of the Sea of Galilee, the people were mostly Jewish people. But in Mark 7, the Syrophoenician woman begs Jesus for just a few crumbs to heal her daughter. And in Mark 8, we read of the account of Jesus feeding the 4,000 people on the eastern side of Galilee. where the population is predominantly Gentile. Here there were 7 baskets of food left over. These stories give us assurance that there is an abundance of life available for everybody, Jews and Gentiles, the churched and the unchurched. Even the crumbs give abundant life through Jesus. This Syrophoenician woman teaches us that Jesus' healing power is not limited goods. There is enough for everyone.